Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Episode 5, The Crooked Man. As we should be expecting by now, the episode starts with a teaser of the mystery to come. Servants attend to a grand household when one of them hears arguing coming from their employers behind a locked door. The argument is interrupted by a loud crash, and when the footman goes around the side of the house to investigate, he finds the French windows swung open, and the lady of the house, Nancy Barclay, passed out on her sofa, while her husband, Colonel James Barclay, is dead next to the fireplace, affixed with a rictus grin. It's almost as if this episode begins near the end of The Dancing Men, and in some ways this story is a rewriting of that one, although with plenty of differences to feel in no way like this is a retread. The basic skeleton of the two stories are similar, but the motivations of the characters, structure of the story, and overall themes are very different. What this means is that if you are familiar with The Dancing Men, you think you've got a head start on unravelling the mystery. But this is a red herring, and you'll soon find yourself back to square one. You're given a clue to the fact that this is going to be different in the next scene. The introduction to Holmes and Watson. We aren't in the familiar surroundings of 221B, Holmes's domain, but at an army barracks where Watson appears to be leading the investigation at this stage.
Had a good record out in India. Did wonders during the mutiny. Sure you won't regret taking the case.
And is very much more comfortable on what feels to him like home turf. They meet with Murphy, acting head of the military base, who greets Watson first and then Holmes. It appears this case began due to Watson's previous military connections. As they begin to discuss what has occurred, Holmes doesn't feel the need to grandstand with one of his impressive deductions, as he's been called in because of his talent. There is a scandal brewing, and the army wish to deal with it discreetly.
I've explained to Holmes how concerned you must be about the possibility of a scandal.
But Murphy is reluctant to give up all of the details to Holmes, and so Holmes gets a little surly with the officer.
Major Murphy, you have told me nothing!
Holmes can appear very rude during encounters like this, especially if badly written or badly acted, but here it's neither, as it's quite clear from Brett's performance that he merely has no time for beating around the bush. Perhaps this is a reflection of his experiences with the Dancing Men case. Not in the stories, but here in the series where each story chronologically follows the last. So while he is the great detective when we first meet him, we still are able to see his character develop as the series goes on. I think that is something that really helped the longevity of this series. The mysteries were almost entirely self-contained, but our two main characters were able to grow, sometimes just a little, as each episode went on. Murphy explains the scene we have just witnessed, but with a little more detail, such as the Colonel having a blow to the back of his head and the discovery of a hand-carved wooden club. Holmes keeps his eyes closed as Murphy recounts this, clearly picturing the scene in his mind. Brett's ability to convey this shows how masterful of an actor he was. As he hears everything he needs to, he comes out of his trance and gets a little fidgety, almost as if he's giving us a cue to what is important and what isn't, before he sits again and allows Watson to take charge over the military aspect, as he half listens but also begins to theorise.
But it's not generally known outside that Jim Barclay began his career as a private soldier in the Mallows.
Did he indeed? From private soldier to commanding officer in the same regiment.
We then get to see a flashback of how Barclay and his wife met many years ago while he was still a private, and the hint that she was popular with more than just Barclay. But he won her heart and he rose up through the ranks. When we return to the present, Murphy hints that the marriage appeared happy, but he had witnessed them arguing over Barclay's jealousy. He described Barclay as sometimes violent and vindictive, and often depressive whenever the past was discussed. This is quite a long exposition scene, but is broken up with various flashbacks, and Paul Chapman, who plays Murphy, is a seasoned character actor, more than able to hold your attention. You have to credit the casting directors for the actors they hire for this series, as this scene could have been intolerable had this performance been weak, which would have undermined the essential information being delivered. We then cut to Holmes and Watson taking a horse and cart ride to visit the Barclay residence, as Watson muses that Mrs. Barclay could have been having an affair with Murphy, which Holmes dismisses.
If there had been anything between Major Murphy and Mrs. Barclay, would he have related the incident of his forgotten cigar case?
It's nice to see this dealt with so quickly, as it was clearly introduced as a possibility. But, as the truth is somewhat adjacent to this theory, it's a testament to the strength of the story that these potential red herrings can be so easily put to one side. At the Barclays, Holmes questions the staff, and we get another perspective on their home life. Mrs. Barclay did a lot of charity work, distributing clothing to homeless veterans, something which the Colonel objected to. She was doing that on the night of the Colonel's death, but returned early looking troubled. The Colonel went to speak with her, and that was the last time he was seen alive. The maid also tells Holmes she heard Mrs. Barclay shout the name David twice, despite the Colonel's name being James. The only useful information Holmes gathers from the other staff is that the key to the room the couple was found in is missing, so there must have been a third person in that room. This is the catalyst Holmes needs to spring into action, as he is able to find tracks of a man leading to and from the house. On closer inspection of the room, he's also able to find the tracks of a strange and unusual animal, which he can't identify. The reveal of how he's able to identify that the animal is carnivorous is a particularly brilliant set piece, with the camera tracking to a cloth, which Holmes whips away to reveal a canary in a cage. Just theatrical enough to be dramatic, without being over the top. I'm of the opinion that this is the first investigation Holmes has done in the series that we can sort of play along with. He has dealt with varying degrees of mystery previously, but here he is just after the crime has been committed, without any real clue as to what has transpired, and so he's putting the pieces of the mystery together in front of us. We hear what he hears, and we see what he sees at virtually the same time. This structure allows us to feel like we're more part of the story than we have been up to this point, and it's a lot of fun trying to keep up, or even get ahead. Holmes then goes to the homeless mission to speak with a Miss Morrison, who was there with Mrs. Barclay the night of the incident.
I cannot betray a friend. Please don't ask me to.
Holmes is able to convince her to reveal what she knows for Mrs. Barclay's sake.
Now, the police suspect her of murder. You owe it to your friend to clear her name.
This is in stark contrast with how he demanded information from Murphy, and again goes back to earlier episodes when we saw Watson suggest Holmes show some compassion when necessary, which he does here. Morrison says amongst the homeless men they were caring for a man with severe physical contortions, with a deep tan, dressed in Middle Eastern clothing. She asked Mrs. Barclay to attend to the poor man, but when she approached him, she turned white. They had a brief but animated conversation, and he left. Mrs. Barclay telling Morrison that he was an old acquaintance. Morrison then discovered
It appears he is an old soldier recently back from India. No one knows anything else about his background, except that he makes a living by entertaining the troops. Conjuring tricks.
this again could be an exposition dump, were it not so wonderfully handled with an emotional performance from Fiona Shaw as Miss Morrison. She brings just the right amount of sincerity to the role as to make it interesting without being mawkish. As the investigation continues, Holmes and Watson visit a local bar for soldiers and quickly find the crooked man performing his act, which includes a mongoose, the mystery animal. You could argue that this is a very convenient meeting, but I think the episode has earned it by setting the breadcrumbs so carefully along the trail. The Colonel died only the night before, so the trail is very much still fresh, and while the speed at which Holmes works may be improbable, he is Sherlock Holmes, and the trail was there if you were able to find the breadcrumbs, so it's very much not impossible. Holmes corners the man, and he reveals his name is Henry Wood. We're about to enter spoiler territory, so beware from here on. Wood then explains what happened on the night and why. Henry was in Barclay's regiment in India, and they were both in love with the same woman, Nancy, now Mrs. Barclay, and she was in love with Henry. The soldier we saw her with in the flashback at the beginning was not Murphy, as we might have assumed, but Henry Wood. Henry was not liked by Nancy's father, who preferred Barclay as a future husband for her, and during a local uprising against the British, they were besieged, and Henry volunteered to send for help. But
I heard enough to realise that I had been betrayed. The very man who had shown me the way to take had betrayed me to the enemy. Barclay had got rid of me to make sure he could have my girl.
He was tortured by his captors and held as a slave for years before he was able to escape due to circumstances unexpected. In his debilitating state, he had no desire to return home or seek out Nancy, but eventually decided to see his home before he died. It was pure chance he ran into Nancy, as he was merely looking to be around other soldiers. She recognised him and he told her the truth, which is what caused her to return home early to confront Colonel Barclay. Henry followed her and watched the argument unfold. When Henry appeared at the window, the shock caused the Colonel to have a heart attack, hitting his head on the fireplace as he fell. Here's where the episode struggles a little, as there's so much exposition, told via flashback, that it becomes a little overwhelming. It's absolutely crucial to the story to get this information out there, and the episode manages to do it on a TV budget incredibly well, but it's very plot heavy. I think this could have been dealt with in a couple of different ways, to break it up, but each comes with drawbacks. The first being to intersperse the episode with the India flashbacks. If done right, this wouldn't have given away the whole story, but would have broken this quasi-prologue up, particularly if you believed the man in the story was Murphy until the reveal of Henry. This might have been off-putting, though. The other option would have been to share the dialogue between Henry and Sherlock, allowing Sherlock to explain the parts of the story he was able to deduce, with Henry filling in the majority of the blanks. This would have at least made it feel more conversational, but it also might have just come off as it already does in the scene. That's the most difficult thing about adapting this story for television, as the story, the As a story, the exposition is not an issue, but as a visual retelling, it's a more difficult act to balance, and I'm not sure this entirely works. Holmes tells Henry that if the coroner confirms the cause of death, then there will be no problem, and we fade to Holmes and Watson back in Baker Street, where Holmes laments how he was unable to work out what David meant sooner.
Ah, my dear Watson, that name David should have told me the whole story. Had I been the ideal reasoner, which you are so fond of depicting, but alas, my powers of deduction failed me.
It was a biblical reference where Barclay had acted in a similar fashion to David. Watson does some deduction of his own in a humorous button to the episode, including paraphrasing a famous misquote.
You appear to have looked it up yourself. Since we returned home from Aldershot.
How did you know?
Elementary, my dear Holmes.
This is a step away from the earlier episodes in the sense that we see a little less of Holmes's character in favour of the mystery and investigation. It does that brilliantly, and it's nice to see a slight change in structure to put the plot front and centre. We get to see Holmes use some of the things we've seen develop in previous episodes, and the story itself is very strong, despite my criticism of how the final act is structured. There's no crime to unveil, except that of the crime against Henry Wood, which Providence deals with before Holmes is even on the scene. It's pretty remarkable that the Sherlock Holmes stories are so well crafted that even when no crime is committed or no villain is caught, it still doesn't feel like a disappointment. Thank you. Goodbye.